Good afternoon, good morning for you, Antoni. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. We were going to talk about a subject. Is that okay with you? Imposter syndrome.
Oh my gosh. It is something that is on my mind all the time. It doesn't get away, especially those who are constantly trying to seek higher education. They're trying to be more proactive about their lives. The more it just pops up. So yeah, it's very close to my heart, this subject.
Right. Let me share my screen and let me know if you can see that. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so imposter syndrome. I've had this many times. I probably doubt my abilities too often, like living up to people's expectations.
Mhm.
And Tony, how about you? What signals did you see that lead to imposter syndrome?
Wow, that's a great question. Because it's, as we all know, those of us who have suffered from imposter syndrome, it's very hard to actually pinpoint it. I think when I first really started to notice that imposter syndrome, it was kind of in the background. And that was when I was doing a lot of higher education when it came to cloud. This was back when I was a cloud and DevOps engineer. I was going through a lot of certifications, and the imposter syndrome would come up whenever I would present something, or I would give people information about what it is that I had learned. But I think when it really popped up and it impacted my life to the point where it was almost debilitating was when I had met others that I worked very closely with, directly with, and they knew more than I did, and they were capable of doing my job plus their job. And so that made me very, very insecure. And this is where it popped up its head to a point where I didn't know what to do. I didn't even understand that it was imposter syndrome. All I knew was that I was feeling very uncomfortable and I didn't want to be there in that situation. So, I would probably have to say that usually when you're not feeling like you're good enough, that's when the best time is to reflect on maybe this is imposter syndrome. Because in reality, we are all good enough.
Wow. Yes, totally agree with that. And you talk about myself, I often experienced imposter syndrome after learning lots of new stuff, just like you. And I have been growing a lot in the last decade. My relationship with it was not a pretty sight. What kind of relationship have you had with imposter syndrome, Antoni?
Well, Mark, it's a love-hate relationship. Let me tell you. And here's why. When it pops up, for me, it's a reminder that I care. I care about what it is that I'm portraying, the information that I'm coming across with. And there are times where it brings out those insecurities and it will give me fear. So having that relationship actually is a good thing because of that reminder. With that constant reminder brings awareness, and that awareness allows me to reflect so that I'm capable of removing that imposter syndrome and reminding myself that I am good enough.
That's brilliant. I feel that resonates so much with me. I often doubted myself, like a first retrospective with a team, when I try something outrageously new with the team. That fear of future failure starts kicking in. Then after the event, I start feeling a perception gap, like others perceive me as a superhero or a Jedi master, but my reality is far from that. Antoni, what perceptions could you add to that?
It's a really good question. I mean, sometimes I get this quite a lot, you know, with my social media following. There are people that look at me like I'm a superstar, and in reality, I'm just like everybody else. A great analogy that I love to use is bread. Now, you buy a loaf of bread from the bakery. It's beautiful. It's delicious. It's nice and spongy. And what people don't realize is that to make that bread, you need fermentation. When you leave that bread, when you leave it out and you don't tend to it, if you don't eat it and you just leave it alone, you don't bag it up, it becomes moldy. That fermentation process keeps on going and gets to a point where it's uncontrollable. And so that's how I love to look at imposter syndrome, where you have that gap where it's sustainable. You're able to control it. But when it gets too far, it gets to a point where you just can't control it. And you have to completely throw out the bread and start new.
Absolutely. Wow, this is so resonating. Let me go on. In the past, I rarely asked for feedback. This amplified my perceptions between others and myself. Being reassured by others just didn't work. I also wasn't looking for the critical feedback, for fear of the worst. How did you handle your first experience with imposter syndrome, Antoni?
My first one. That was a long time ago. I can't remember my first one, but I think what happened was I became aware of something that was not right. It was a moment of self-awareness. And I noticed that it was very uncomfortable. There was this discomfort. I didn't know where it was coming from. So over time, I now knew that feeling. So when I have that discomfort, you know, being uncomfortable is, for me, the sign where I need to accept that discomfort. I need to stand in that discomfort and be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
So, Antoni, I really want to push imposter syndrome away for good, or at least manage it really, 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 really well. I want to serve others as they deserve the best of me. Antoni, what advice would you kindly give so that I can nail imposter syndrome for good?
I'd love to say that you can get rid of it, but in reality, it's always going to be there. And it's always going to be there because we care. We care about the things that we do or say, and we care about ourselves. We care about ourselves so much that sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves. And this is where self-care becomes, as you write on your board, the kindness that we need. You know, we talk a lot about being kind to others. I tell my son every morning, always be kind whenever you encounter people in general. Just be kind. But what about being kind to ourselves? There's not enough of it, and we need to live it. We need to accept it, that we're good enough.
We are good. Thank you, Antoni.
Thanks, Mark.